Today we honor Peter Krok, Editor-in-Chief of the Schyukill Valley Journal and Humanities Director of the Manayunk Roxborough Art Center, for his decades of service to the Philadelphia and greater literary community. 2020 marks 30 years of Peter's Sunday Humanities reading series held at MRAC, which he started in 1990. The spring 2020 edition of the SVJ, Schyukill Valley Journal, that was our 50th issue. And Peter has been the editor-in-chief since 2001, when the founder, Jim Marinell, passed. The Schyukill Valley Journal was also established in 1990, and that makes us the 30th anniversary for the SVJ, which I like to point out is pretty intimidating for me personally, because that just barely gives me seniority on the journal. So it's the SVJ has staying power. Peter is the author of Looking for an Eye, out from Foothills Press in 2008, and now Wounded World, Moonstone Arts 2020. I don't know this. I thought this would be interesting to share tonight. Peter once told me that we're the sort of poets who don't really write collections, that we write more individual poems, and they're just sort of like, you know, little bursts and sort of float, you know, a little bit. And I think, you know, his comments about us maybe struggling to assemble collections was maybe partly, you know, some of that. And then, you know, I think more of it though is, at least in the case of Peter, I think he hasn't really published a ton of collections because he's been so focused on his core values of connection in the community, of supporting the work of others, writers and artists, and just generally being a steward of the arts for the Philadelphia literary community. So today, not only do we honor Peter, but we also have the opportunity to celebrate his new collection. Wounded World is a heavy text. I spent quite a bit of time sitting with it and reflecting on it, preparing for the interview. And I believe it's, you know, both heavy and valuable, especially for those who are struggling with loss and grief. And it'll come up in the interview. You know, right now we've been hearing a word, you know, a newer term floated quite a bit about ambiguous loss. And this is a collection of personal loss, but we'll get into that. The poems in Wounded World have grit. They're city poems, they're down to earth, they're democratic and approachable, by which I mean they're not high flown or full of reference points that require specialized knowledge or any kind of Ivy League degree. Much like Richard Hugo, Peter's poems return to the haunts of his life, the stuff that makes a place a place. Peter's language is that of a person who, again in Hugo's terms, owns their language, their personal universe. Peter minds these spaces in his never-ending quest for meaning. The poet asks, what does it all mean? And because the answer is always silence, the poet continues to ask. And so now, have a little Q&A with Peter.
Well, thank you, Mark. And I just wanted to say, one can't say enough for Larry Robin. The guy is just, he's done so much for the poetry, the literary community. He's a blessing. So thank you, Larry. I got a phone in front of me.
A phone? I don't know if that's a technical thing.
Yeah, I don't either, but I didn't want to be out of the loop.
Well, it's good to see Mark.
Yeah.
Well, we'll try not to worry about the phone. Larry, was there a way of doing a side-by-side, or is it just going to flip back and forth depending on who's speaking?
Not a way that we're aware of for doing a side-by-side, but we can make sure that only the two of you are unmuted, so it should just flip back and forth.
Oh, okay. No worries. Appreciate it. Just wanted to check on that. All right, so let's get started with a little bit of a talk. So Peter, for a long time now, you've talked about your belief in the value of connection. So I wanted, to have you talk about a little bit how this is played out and why you would encourage others to focus more on connecting.
I'll tell you, maybe this is an aside. My wife says I'm better at connecting than at writing. Leave that alone. I've just always felt it was important to communicate with other people. And in fact, what happened with the Schyukill Valley Journal is really an accumulation of a lot of people that I met over the years, and that kind of got trapped in, you might say, but they got involved with the journal, and they became like editors, writers for the journal, and all that was built upon people that I got to meet along the way, and that brought into the journal. And I always liked that Ian Forster's line, only connect. And that really meant something to me. And even today, when I have a function, we have a gathering here, my wife and I, we always make it a point to bring everybody together as much as possible, not to have people in corners, just welcome people and have them meet somebody else. And that's what I've tried to do with the Schyukill Valley Journal and with the Humanities and the Arts Center. And fortunately, it's been a real wonderful place to do that. And the journal, I'm proud of.
Well, you mentioned the Art Center. That actually brings me to the next question. So given your 30 years as humanities director, what would you say were the takeaways, from working in the Philadelphia community?
Well, I want to mention that I've been involved in working more at the Manayunk Art Center than I did with my full-time job working for the federal government. So it goes to show you where my interests lie. I think, my wife is laughing. I think that it's important. When my wife laughing, it kind of took me away from my frame. Sorry. So one of the important things is that I've enjoyed is meeting so many other people and getting to appreciate what they're doing. And it kind of becomes like a camaraderie, or you might say a brotherhood or a sisterhood or whatever it is of writers. And to me, that's almost as important as anything else. In fact, I think one of the primary reasons I keep the journal alive is because it gives us a community of kindred spirits, and we're interested in writing, and we're interested in sharing what we do. And that's what gives it a certain vitality, and that gives me a joy just to begin and to continue to connect with others.
So what would you say it takes to run a successful journal that has that kind of staying power?
Well, I guess you might say one is to keep the cost down, but it really is a challenge. And if I had to pay anybody, it would defeat, we just couldn't do it. There's not enough money to be made in this. In fact, I was very lucky that I had some patrons that really helped. But most of those patrons are gone now, so that might be a little hint. But that helped, and the fact that I had people that wanted to work and had a kind of like a stick-to-itness that really helped. And you might say we've had a number of poetry editors, had a couple managing editors, other people, a couple people that actually did the setup for the journal itself, the managing, putting the journal together. I mean, there've been a lot of people that have worked with me over the years. Unfortunately, other people came along, and part of the reason they came along is somehow I found them, we brought them into the journal. And you're a good example of that, Mark. And and some other people too. I don't have to mention any names, but some other people. So I've been very fortunate that way. And I've always wanted to keep it. I've never had big dreams of really going out there and making big sales or whatever, because I knew it wasn't gonna work. You know, it's so I kept my limits. You know, to me that was important, and keep your costs down as much as possible. And so it's been kind of like a mom and pop operation in a way, but it's been a lot of fun and challenging. And we're going to miss you, Mark.
Well, I'll be around, don't worry.
You'll be around.
Yeah. So let's pivot to the new collection, Wounded World, which, as I mentioned, discusses a great deal of personal loss, and there is also ambiguous loss, the term popularized during the pandemic for, the sort of veil of despair. I wanted to call attention to, specific poems that appear in the collection that for me were sort of vintage or classic Peter poems. Plinkies was one, The Crowd, The Lemon Tree, Hands Out, and Anselina. Is that how you say that one? Anselina. And then there's also the poems where I feel that you're sort of revisiting, older territory. And I felt often with a disarming, kind of a tragic and disarming new take. An example was comparing the distance of words to January 1. And so I wanted to ask about the shift in your poetics over time.
Wow. I guess I've tried to be more specific, So I think I went from a more generic point of view, range, called moody, and mood, to something more specific. And I've tried to concentrate a bit more on images. And I've tried to get deeper into specific subjects. Although in a lot of ways, this is similar to the other one in terms of it came from me, but I thought the other one was more, that's called ethereal. And this one, I think I did a lot more in terms of, I can see myself more as a pictorial writer, in the sense that I paint scenes, I take scenes together and I put into words like people on a corner, the drug, let's say the people getting drugs, the drunk that I meet at right by the Philadelphia Library. So I've done more in terms of painting scenes of these people and meeting them. So I've done more of that than I did earlier.
Let me ask about that, because that was one of the questions I wanted to discuss with you. Was as you mentioned, addicts, the homeless, generally those in need. Readers would notice that again and again you turn towards these subjects. The sort of people in our society who suffer the most, and often people turn away from looking at that. And it's notable that you don't look away from it in your poetry. You actually bear witness to these realities. So the question would be, do you feel a sense of duty to do that, to speak for people who can't speak for themselves?
I guess we write what we know, and it's just empathetic response, I guess. And I guess I can feel for these other people. I know what it is to be left on a bench, like the Lost Glove that I've written about. And I just imagine myself if I were in that situation. So I guess I've always been drawn toward, you know, the hurt, the tragic. I guess it's part of the empathy, and I always feel that way anyway. So it's just part of my character.
That makes sense. Go ahead. Oh. Yeah, Glory. So the next question is, so like in your book, Looking for an Eye, the first book, in Wounded World, we find that you've continued your search. As I mentioned, you know, that you're always searching, you're always questioning. And, you know, this made me think of Socrates, right? His thing was, you know, always asking question after question, sort of making people around him a little insane in his day.
Wait a minute, I wouldn't go that far.
Not you, Peter. I'm talking about Socrates. But so, you know, you're big on the questions, right? And my thought was that maybe there's not a right answer always, but, you know, that sort of line that people say, like, maybe we learn to ask better questions. I mean, do you think that's what it is, that we just learn to ask better questions, or there's more to it?
Well, a lot of what I do stems from questions, things I ask myself. Now, whether they're better questions, I like to think that they're larger questions, you know, rather than the me. It's more, I'm trying to do more of the us, you know, than the me. So from that point of view, I've enlarged the scope. But this isn't something you think about. This is just something that happens.
So I wanted to finish with a few just sort of the lighter questions that people can, you know, reflect on for when you read from the collection. So can you tell us a couple of the poets that you never tire of reading? And then the second part of this would be advice that you have for poets and writers.
Wow. I very much like Stanley Kunitz. I've always been attached to a Russian poet by the name of Osip Mandelstam. Always been attached to, he's got more of a world, he takes like in all of Russia, you know, in his soul. I've always loved William Butler Yeats, although as I've read him lately, it almost seems like the voice seems more distant, you know, although the poems are classic. It just, they're not as close to where we are today as they were for me, let's say 30 or 40 years ago. And T.S. Eliot, I mean, to me, he's number one. And the four quartets, that's probably, to me, the best thing written in the 20th century, and even until today. Mary Oliver's nice. And Jane Kenyon, some of the poems that she did, Afterwards and Let Evening Come, they just always blow me away. So that's some example anyway. And in terms of what do I recommend? Well, one of the things I recommend is to read Notebooks to, Notebooks to a Young Poet by Rilke.
Oh, you're talking about Rilke.
Rilke, yeah. I mean, that first book about that book.
The advice book.
Yeah, I mean, that book is full of questions. And that's probably the most influential book in terms of what it stirred in me. I would recommend that to everyone. Um, I would say get to meet other people. Obviously read, but get to meet other people. Look at, I guess you can't get away from looking at journals, but I think probably the more important part is to meet other people and to share with other people, you know, your writing. Now, in terms of me, I'm not the kind of person that wakes up in the morning and says, okay, I'm going to start writing a poem today. It's much more of that serendipitous kind of quality for me. Another thing I do think is important is to carry a notebook, carry a book with you so that when you get struck, you know, you're writing it down. In fact, most of my best poems, or the poems I feel closest to, come in those kind of moments. I used to love to ride the L. And when I was riding the L, it put me in another space. And that would often lead to observations and to poems. One example was I remember seeing some kids at 63rd and Market Street, and they were playing basketball with a crate as, you know, as the net. And I just, that did something for me. So carry a notebook, write your, you know, what immediately hits you, and keep that going. Another thing I think might be useful too is date it when you take the observation. Sometimes later on you say, when did that happen? Especially if you wind up using two notebooks. So date it if you can. To me, one of the most important qualities of people is listening. So be a good listener. Another important quality, I guess the three most important qualities that I see in general are listening, questioning, and I'm trying to think of the third one. Listening, questioning, and oh yeah, there has to be a gratefulness in life. If you're not grateful, if you don't have any gratitude, you're going to be miserable. And these are the kind of people you want to avoid. So you have to have a certain, you know, a joy or at least a gratitude that you are who you are and you appreciate life. So with that comes an appreciation of life. So they're three of my fundamentals anyway.
That's a nice place to land on, I think.
Yeah, well.
Do you have further thoughts to add? Just generally that you'd like to share?
Well, I like to share that part of the real joy in doing what I've been doing is the connections that you've made, you know, made along the way, and all the people whose lives have touched you, and hopefully you've touched them, and the brotherhood you get out of that. And I've been grateful because if I didn't have that, there would really be a hole in my life. You know, it's that important for me. And the whole poetry thing, even during this pandemic, when people are complaining and like, you know, and I admit it really is a burden, but I don't see it as much of a burden as a lot of other people do, because I can squirrel away in my own little world upstairs in my study. And so for me, it's not as much of a burden as it is for a lot of other people, because I'm glad to have the writing and the connections that way.
Poets need a place not only on the page, but also on the stage. This requires organization. It requires time and energy, someone to make phone calls and book dates. Poets can be notoriously difficult to nurture, at times narcissistic, inflexible, and sometimes even ungrateful. This is the Byronic tendency of the artistic soul. I will create works of genius. You can take care of the rest, whoever you are who does things like that. Those who make such worlds possible are the publishers, editors, hosts of salons and readings, the ones who unite and encourage, advocate and promote, not out of any unseemly desire to be recognized themselves, but out of a genuine devotion to the art. They serve ancient arts, as have countless others before them. Their selfless ministrations fashion opportunities for art to flourish. We think of Sylvia Beach of Shakespeare and Company, James Laughlin of New Directions, Barney Rossett of Grove Press, Harriet Monroe of Poetry Magazine. Frequently, they are authors themselves, and so they truly grasp what is at stake, what is possible, and perhaps most importantly, what is to be lost if the arts are not sustained with hard work, sometimes sheer toil, shaped by dedication. Without them, we'd trudge along each alone in a world where manuscripts languished in desk drawers or on hard drives or somewhere in the cloud. Without them, we wouldn't be able to share our art or, just as importantly, meet those who in time become valued friends and inspirations for our own work. Peter deserves to be counted among those who have made art possible in an age as inhospitable to the muse as any that came before or is likely to come. We all owe a great debt to Peter, whose devotion and care are a kind of magic, downright noble, and for many of us, indeed, indispensable. It is hard to imagine what Philadelphia poetry would be without Peter. And so I salute the man, and I thank him most sincerely and humbly, and I hope you will all join me in doing so. So bravo, Peter. Congratulations on your many years of great success and on your own new publication. And it is now time for you to be in the spotlight and for us to listen to you and pay attention to your work that you've cared about so much as you've cared about our work. And so here's also to many more years to come, and looking forward to the next time we can actually all be together in a room and share an evening of poetry together in real time and real space. Thank you.
Kindness. You and I have spoken of it. A cardinal virtue, a modest one. Some people are born with it, you can tell. Grandparents, wise teachers, loyal friends. Others may master it by waking. Sorrow wakes, so does struggle. You'll become from knowing sorrow. Know enough struggle and you'll begin. Clasp another's hand, offer yours. Live verily, and you step into yourself. Know we all dwell in a vale of tears. But vales are surrounded by mountains, and knowing kindness, we climb by it, by offered hands. You've been a climber, Peter, are a hand offerer. I can tell you were born with it.
There have been rare experiences that I've had in my life where I feel as though I have come to occupy not only a specific time and place, but also am at an instant somehow connected to the ages. I had an art history teacher freshman year in college who could take you all the way to the caves of Lascaux and back in a darkened classroom in less than an hour. Being in the audience in the middle of a Shakespeare play, especially for some reason, A Midsummer Night's Dream can do this. It happened to me while reading From Dawn to Decadence, 1500 to the present, 500 years of Western cultural life by Jacques Barzun. One of those rare and rarefied places where I have reached this realm in Philadelphia has been the Manayunk Roxborough Arts Center during Peter Krok's Sunday afternoon poetry and humanities session. At times I have entered the building for one of these events thinking that perhaps I'm missing an Eagles game or a particularly brilliant fall afternoon outside. But the fact is that I have never exited one of Peter's transcendent sessions feeling as though I've missed out on anything. In fact, I have rather felt as though I've caught something rare and sparkling and become part of a very in crowd that I have been promoted to citizenship into, a very select and special place having to do with Athens, Rome, Paris, and New York, as well as Philadelphia, but also something more. A featured poet can be in the middle of reciting a passage, and suddenly I feel myself transported to the nearby banks of the Schuylkill, where I, almost like Jack Kelly in A Single Skull, feel at one with the river, with the ebbs and the flows of a city belonging to a place, a civilization, a planet. Thank you, Peter.
When I arrived in Philadelphia, Peter reached out to me, as he has to so many others, I think, with kindness. He invited me to read at the Manayunk Roxborough Art Center, bought my books, and took me out to lunch. We had great conversations at the Panera Bread in Haverton. He gave me the lay of the land, and we chatted about T.S. Eliot, Louise Glick, and Ernest Hilbert. Round of applause, Ernest Hilbert. And maybe some of the other people who were in this giant room. And I love Peter's poems. At one point in his terrific book, Looking for an Eye, which is jam-packed with the streets of Philadelphia, its red bricked row homes, porches, subway tracks, children playing, and many voices, he declares, "I feel mighty as a sparrow." And I think of Peter this way, as the mighty sparrow, humbly unstoppable, a warm-hearted force in the world of local poetry.
Note to my daughter on Andrew Wyeth's Wind from the Sea, 1947. This Wyeth painting is briefly a picture of a window that faces the ocean, and there's a curtain blowing in the ocean breeze. Stand inside the house, a bit back from the window, taking it in. Zigzag of blue-white water, loop of blue-green spruce, the sail of white lace curtain. Look closer, within the gauze, the unraveling story of two birds, wings raised, locked and waiting. Tell them next gust to keep their eyes on the northeast spiral of that far tree, not to be drawn by those bits of mirror water to the left. It's not the thrill, the breeze, a tremble. And wait, love, until you can sense beyond sight their brushes of wingtips combing the needles of the trees. They only fly while you look.
Think about Peter. I think first of all, a caring, sensitive person, quick to praise others while deflecting attention from himself. He's a man with deep compassion for others and a great appreciation for raw and polished talent whenever and wherever it presents itself to him. I first met Peter at a workshop conducted by the poet Christopher Bursk at Muir several years ago. Relatively inactive at the time, I was eager to participate in the workshop, having known Bursk's work for quite a while and admired him as a courageous poet. It was a rare opportunity, I thought, for one-on-one interaction with a poet I respected while possibly finding a community of poets I might have commonalities with. In fact, that's what occurred. I was even more impressed when I found out that Bursk and his co-facilitator had donated their services pro bono to benefit Muir. I thought this guy Peter must have something special going on here. A month or so after the workshop ended, Peter called and asked if I would like to do a reading at Muir. I felt flattered, recognized, and appreciated. That's Peter in a nutshell. He makes you feel good. He accepts who you are and is open in his appreciation of the things that make you unique. Deflecting attention from himself, he puts you in the spotlight. That's a very generous thing, a very decent thing, and it's rare. We became friends, and within a year or two, we were sharing intimate details about our lives and helping each other get through tough times. I have learned that Peter is a friend I can count on to be there for me, not just in the poetry world, but in the big, bad world where all of us are struggling to succeed and survive. That makes him extremely special in my mind.
The block of marble contemplates Michelangelo. He is still, sometimes as still as me, hewn as I was from the hills around Carrera, dreaming and being the same. Satisfied centuries of whirring away with my old companions, water, wind, time. Now it's different. I stand upright and apart. I tower over him, naked, already sacrificed to the dusty happenings in his head. He's almost comical, scurrying like a bug, or hunched on his stool for hours, staring as if I were a shining thing he'd follow to a future or a past. He chips away at me, lessens me, makes me strange. He's impossible, opening his little mouth to what the earth denies. Bread teeming from the skies, water from the rock. He sleeps in the dust at my foot.
When I think of Peter, the word inclusiveness comes to mind. As an accomplished poet and affable, long-tenured director of the Sunday afternoon reading series at the Manayunk Art Center, he brings poets together to participate in inspired programs such as Poetry and Humor, Recovering Catholics, and to help promote the illustrious Schyukill Valley Journal. At readings, Peter always chooses an aisle seat in the back. He sits attentively with pen and clipboard, jotting down specific details and poems that have moved or excited him. He enjoys chatting with poets and attenders at the end of readings, encouraging everyone to sample the goodies before we gather up the folding chairs and return to our domestic routines. An observation he made at the podium one afternoon has stayed with me over the years. It was a day in spring, and maybe the Phillies were playing a home game when I heard him say, "You know, this coming together for poetry readings is like when we were kids on the sandlot field. We can't play baseball with our friends anymore, so now we come together to do this, to play poetry." I like this analogy for its aptness of expression, and even more for the way that Peter delivered it in a gentle, ruminative tone. Perhaps poetry does try to fill a void in our lives, to connect us with our childhood games on the streets and fields. There is one distinction I can make, however. The sandlot games I played could be brutal. Kids who hit and fielded poorly were chosen last, if they were chosen at all, when sides were drawn. In Peter's poetry programs, there are no sides, and no one goes home feeling dejected. At the MAC, we are all made to feel welcome. Everyone gets to play.
Brick by Brick, for Peter Krok. The red brick poet built himself, brick by brick, book by book, building and filling his home with homages to them. Rumi, Neruda, Whitman. Ask his wife, Bobby Lou, his love and governor, who has made room for them all. Rilke, Poe, Milosh, Yeats, Auden, Lorca, Kunitz, Thomas, Lowell, a man of many an homage, word by word, book by book, brick by brick, he built himself, the red brick poet.
I don't remember exactly when I first met Peter. I do know that I'd heard about him from more than one person before we met in person. My best guess that it must have been at a Mad Poets event sometime in the late 90s or early 2000s. In any case, when we did meet, I immediately noticed qualities manifest equally in Peter's person and his poetry, a warmth and openness that radiates out from his face, reaching out to the world, a curiosity and acceptance that one might call childlike if it weren't so sophisticated. When Peter talks with you, he gives you his full attention. One doesn't realize how rare this is until it happens. Peter is not in a hurry. He takes the time to consider what you are saying, to take in the full import, to notice what there is to be noticed. Though Peter has always been associated with the city of Philadelphia, we discovered that Peter now lives in the same suburban town as I do, Havertown. This discovery delighted him as it did me, and when we saw each other at events, we would both feel glad to have our town represented twice. On occasion, I walk my dog past his house. His house and yard are immaculate, the yard of a man who cares and takes care of his environment. I write about these qualities of Peter the man because he is one of those rare people for whom it may be said the man and the poet line up completely. Look into his poems and you will see what you see in Peter's face, a radical curiosity and openness to the world and all it has to offer. Peter does not dodge the pain and heartbreak in life, nor does he overlook the joys. Serious but never solemn. It is appropriate that Peter's book, I should say his first book, is titled Looking for an Eye, the eye that looks, the eye that sees. In an interview with Mike Cohen, Peter shared that when he was in high school, he always had to have a book in his hand, another thing that Peter and I have in common, and that one of his favorite books was a book with biographies of famous poets. He said that at the time, the poems without the biographies just didn't do the same thing for him. It was not until reading Looking for an Eye and reading the biography on the back cover that I learned that Peter was born in West Berlin and came to Philadelphia in 1948 as part of the Berlin airlift. While one could argue that this biographical information isn't strictly necessary to reading Peter's poems, it does add a dimension. Of course, it's natural for someone who might feel the stirrings of poetry within to be drawn to a poet's biography, because after all, we want to learn something about how to do it. Not just how to put the words down on paper, but how to live the life that will allow us to do it. Beyond that, though, I think a biography can make a poet human, bring him or her closer to us, and us closer to her or him. It can increase the sense of intimacy that we may have with an individual poem, as well as with the poet's oeuvre. If I might speculate, I would venture that this is one quality that Peter as an adolescent might have sought from poetry, what many of us seek and what Peter's poetry delivers, intimacy, an intimacy that is not cloying or inward looking, but sends us back out to the world. If I were to speculate further, I can see how Peter's early experience would help render him sensitive to the music and nuance of language, and once again, transformed what could be seen as an inward turning into an outward one as well. Others will attest to Peter's service to Philadelphia poetry through his stewardship of the Manayunk Roxborough Humanities and Poetry program and the Schyukill Valley Journal. I apologized to him once for not making more of the Sunday programs, as I found my weekends caught up in family events. Family always comes first, he said. Let me attest to Peter's presence, a gentle human one, always ready for the next day for revelations to come.
Peter Krok is a kindred spirit. he welcomed me into his monthly writer-poet readings and invited me into the monthly critique circle gatherings run by he and David Kozinski. I thank him for luring my poetry out of the closet. Peter is the longest serving active member of the Manayunk Roxborough Art Center Board of Directors. For over 30 years, he has directed the MRAC Humanities programs, services, and events. These include writer-poet readings, critique circle gatherings, writing workshops, Schyukill Valley Journal, launches, performance art, special events, and more. Peter is a published poet, a lover of words, lines, rhymes. He is a reader of books, journals, printed works from everywhere, a faithful Catholic family man, blessed with his lifelong soulmate, Bobby Lou, to stand together in trying times, 2 daughters still left to embrace. And this is a little brief poem that I wrote for Peter. It's called the Philadelphia Red Brick Poet, MRAC Humanities Guru, SVJ Partner, Editor-in-Chief, published journals, online website entries, monthly readings by writers and poets integrated together through one man, 30 years of continuous service, keeping the written word alive and well. A father forced to lie his first son down, a husband sharing care with his life mate, bonding closer with 2 living daughters, one in state, one out west in Montana, loving places to recharge and refresh, then return to his red brick poet life.
People know him as the Red Brick Poet, but I know him as a friend, family man, a good person whose passion and affiliation with city poets at large always brings the warmest welcome to anyone with a poem in their hands. Yes, Pete Krok has been the man, so we all must understand to back him up all this time. Yes, he has been and still is an honor. Thank you, Pete.
I put a hand in my pocket and pull out a thread that unravels a string of questions. The more I pull, the longer it grows like a vine in the earth. I met Peter in the mid-1990s. He is easy to talk with and very persuasive, and I soon became a Schyukill Valley Journal subscriber. Besides being a fine poet himself, Peter has been a tireless ambassador for all forms of literature while editing and publishing the Schyukill Valley Journal and as Humanities Director of the Manayunk Roxborough Arts Center. Either job would be a large and time-consuming responsibility for any volunteer, but Peter was doing all this before he retired, which I think is even more impressive. So in the last 25 years or so, I have attended numerous presentations at MRAC, including SVJ issue launches, readings by poets and writers from the region and from around the country and even from abroad, as well as literary events that featured ekphrasis, essays about and dramatic readings of work by authors like Whitman, Dickens, and Poe. I've also participated in extraordinary poetry workshops led by Eileen Moeller, Christopher Bursk, Donna Wolfe-Palacio, Leonard Belasco, and the late Len Roberts. All of the above were thanks to Peter. In 2015, the SVJ Online went up and offers a variety of content while the biennial print journal continues to live on. Peter enjoys presenting his own poetry to audiences, and he obviously relishes being able to spotlight the talents of others. This is, I think, one of the most salient things about him, his generosity. He is certainly true to one of his favorite mottos: it's all about the word. When hosting SVJ events, Peter invariably credits the magazine's founder, Jim Marinell, who died in 2001. This repeated act of remembrance speaks a great deal about both of them. I recommend a splendid interview of Peter by Steve Delia, organized by Steve and by SVJ features writer Mike Cohen. You can find it on YouTube. Finally, just a few favorite lines from Peter's poem Explanations, which is from Looking for an Eye. How do I explain a kiss, the daydreamer gazing out his window, or that stranger in your looking glass? Thank you very much, Peter, for all you do.
One of Peter's favorite sayings is always connect. He is keenly aware of the human condition, and his poetry is as honest and soulful as the man himself. He isn't afraid to be vulnerable, and it's the quiet question that often drives his poetry. Peter's writing reflects his own humanity in that he notices who and what is invisible and gives them a name, a voice. I'd always imagine grabbing a coffee or a cold beer at some corner pub with Peter to glean from his wisdom, poetic musings, and acute understanding on life. But time and different locations and losing touch made that difficult. I like to imagine us having a good hearty laugh. Reminds me of Charles Bukowski in one of his poems, a good hearty laugh, Nirvana, before our departure. Peter's poetry often brings me back to my own youth growing up in a red brick row house in Northeast Philadelphia, where St. Anselm's carnivals were the equivalent to Disney World. Peter uniquely understands the charm and magic that Philadelphia beholds, as he has been affectionately called the red brick poet. Congratulations, Peter, to the decades of service to the literary community of Philadelphia and beyond. Thank you.
There are many facets to Pete's world, and it's difficult for me to know where to start. And I'm not writing any poems, sorry, it's not my genre, but I do want to still honor Pete. If I wrote a poem, it would rhyme, I'm sorry to say. At the beginning, which was about 20 years ago, when many of us were doing readings around Philadelphia, we were getting a lot of motion and getting things started. Pete invited me, along with a co-editor, to be the fiction editors of the Schyukill Valley Journal. I was really honored. It was when Pete was in the earlier stages of working on that journal that I found in Pete a refreshing, enthusiastic personality. I was most impressed about his knowledge and information about the poets and prose writers that locally, and even further than that. I was more impressed by his wonderful poetry that touched me deeply. In 2001, Pete became editor, I hope these are the right dates, became editor-in-chief of Schyukill Valley Journal after coordinating literary programs since 1990. A better person at the helm could not be found. I was somewhat aware of the Schyukill Valley Journal and soon familiarized myself with the wonderful artistic professionalism of the journal. Pete has tenacity, passion, well thought out concepts, and energy. His devotion shows in all that he does. Today, the journal is on a par with the best, and the reason is Pete. That being said, Pete doesn't contain his efforts to the journal alone. Offering a variety of events at the Manayunk Art Center, including those for famous poets, Pete does the bulk of management and coordination. Also, Pete continues to write his wonderful original poetry. His enthusiasm touches all who know him. It is a bit hard to equate Pete's loneliness in his youth with the wonderful spokesperson of all that is literary today. The poems he publishes are exquisite, heart-rending, and profoundly emotional. I can relate to his work that draws one into the depths of his mind and heart. He is so honest, unusually so. Each time the Schyukill Valley Journal is launched, Pete coordinates readings of those poets and prose writers who have been published in that particular issue. He also fundraises for the Manayunk Art Center as well, where he finds the energy for all that he does puzzles me, but there it is, it's out there. The poets and writers in Pennsylvania and other states across the country owe Pete a big thank you. They all owe Pete a big thank you for promoting and honoring their work. I've always admired Pete for his intelligence, extraordinary efforts in promoting those in the arts. He offers a light for many authors who, when upset about their craft, want to give up. He is always available to help and gives his sweat, tears, and laughter to all who are lucky enough to know him. And a big thank you to Bobby Lou. She is a saint for never complaining, at least to us, about the time Pete has spent giving so much of himself to others. And I believe she has not complained much to Pete. I would with my husband, so I really, really think she is a saint. Thank you all, and thanks.
When I think of Peter, I see a Franz Hals painting of a jovial, round-faced, exuberant man who loves what he does. Certainly at the humanities programs at the Manayunk Roxborough Art Center that Peter has led with such dedication for so many years, one sees in Peter a curious and sensitive leader who not only knows a great deal about literature, both of the past and present, but knows how to make everyone feel welcome and appreciated. He helps us to laugh and think deeply at the same time. I first met Peter perhaps in the 1980s when I went with my late husband, Jim, to poetry readings at the Northeast Regional Library, Robbins Bookstore, and the Writers' House at the University of Pennsylvania. Peter and Jim struck up a friendship and greatly appreciated each other's talents as writers. Jim became inspired to create the Schyukill Valley Journal so that the local writers would have a place to publish their work. When Jim died in 2001, without missing a beat, Peter took on the SVJ. Not only that, he greatly expanded it and turned it into a well-respected literary journal. Peter has truly been a giant in Philadelphia's literary world while maintaining humility and good humor. No wonder people keep coming to his programs at MRAC to hear poetry, sometimes in his own thought-provoking words. He reminds us of what is important in life. When I read his poems and go to his events, I come away a taller, deeper, and happier person. He is a gift to us all. Thanks for everything you do, Peter.
About 5 years ago, I had the pleasure of hosting a roast on Peter, and it was a great afternoon. He took some brutal blows, but everyone ended with something very kind and thoughtful, because Peter is a person who brims with humanity. And in fact, the best presenter of the day, it was Betty Lou. It was very entertaining. So I just wanted to say that I've known Peter for 10 years, working at the MR Art Center with him on the board. And he truly is a gentleman. He just has an endearing humility. And it's been a pleasure day in and day out. And when I did the roast, there was a line I chose to sort of represent Peter, and it was a quote from Don Quixote, where they told him, "Windmills, if you fight them, will cast you down into the mire." And his response was, "Are up among the stars." And that kind of reminds me of Peter. He sees the best in everything and everyone, and he's a value to work with. Thank you.
I got to know Peter through a mutual friend in the early 1990s. Yes, it's been that long. He welcomed me to his Overbrook Poets group with a friendly and warm smile. We became good friends, and I got to know his lovely wife, Bobby Lou, and his children. Peter has a large and kind heart. He is there for you when you need his help. He greets everyone with a warm smile and makes people feel special and unique. He keeps his calm even when he is sad or upset. I admire him for his courage and tolerance. He showed a lot of strength when he lost his beloved son, and I guess his faith kept him strong through his tragedy. He's always been a good friend during all these years. Peter has a good sense of humor too. He tolerates my sarcastic and bitter jokes in a humble manner. What's most interesting about Peter and my friendship with him is that we argue all the time like two grumpy old people and amuse our other fellow poets. He has given me the honorable title of the Persian princess whenever he introduces me at my readings at the Manayunk Art Center. Peter is an emotional and sensitive person. You can hear and feel these qualities in him when he talks about his family. His poems about the loss of his father and son are good examples of his sensitivity and affection. I'm very thankful for having the opportunity to know him. He's extremely sociable and makes friends with everybody he meets in a blink of an eye with his charming smile. That is just who Peter is. As long as I can remember, he has carried a briefcase full of books and literary magazines under his arms, which are on the verge of falling when he goes to poetry readings. As a poet, he's full of nostalgia, and his grip onto the past is very noticeable. Always you return to these red bricks now, where you grew from daydream adolescent to daydream father. His language is smooth and very expressive. His poetry is full of emotion and empathy. He deals more with humans rather than nature. This shows his love and concern for human beings and their needs. His recent book, Looking for an Eye, shows how he is searching for an eye, an ultimate and wise eye, which will guide him through life with all its splendor and wonders. Thank you, Peter.
As Humanities Director of the Manayunk Art Center, Peter Krok has provided an audience and an opportunity for countless writers in Delaware Valley. He's a publisher and editor-in-chief of the Schyukill Valley Journal. Peter has been the glue and the guiding light of the SVJ since he took over from founder Jim Marinell in the 90s. Personally, I owe Peter a boatload of thanks for trusting me with the keys to the poetry editor's office when I replaced Kelly Jean White. He always remained true to his promise of letting me do it my way for the 10 years I was poetry editor. We poets in the Delaware Valley area are blessed to have poetry angels. Chisel Peter Krok's name to the short list of individuals such as Peter Murphy, Larry Robin, Christopher Bursk, Eileen D'Angelo, and Joanna Leva, to name a few. Angels that have kept the word vibrant. Angels that have kept the word alive.
Peter, you're a wonderful guy. You welcomed Lily and me when we came to Philadelphia in 1987. You were among the first people we met, you and Ray Greenblatt. inviting us into the Overbrook Poets. And since then, we've come to know all the various hats you've been wearing, and you've been indispensable to this town and to the poetry scene ever since we've known you. And you still are, and God bless. Go on being just that way forever. I just want to say to you personally, we've been through good times and not so good times and tragic times too together. You've always been there for us and for everyone, really. I think of you as one of the most generous people I know. And when I say that, I don't mean generous about this or that. I mean with a generosity of spirit that I have rarely met in my life. I think of you as a person who's got a smile on his face, even when he's not smiling. And so God bless and many years to come, Peter.
Leaving the sky of Montana. This is where my daughter lives, in Billings, Montana. And this is kind of like a scene when I'm leaving, Billings, Montana. They de-ice the wings, the plane taxis on the runway. I'm leaving Billings, the many homes, the 100,000 breaths down there, leaving the city around the rim. Several rows down the aisle, the overhead lights and halo of woman's silver hair. The teachers rising, the many beds lifting their covers. The coffee makers are being turned on. Mechanics getting in their Chevy pickups, placing their metal-lined cups in the cup holders. Grocery employees walking the aisles, stocking the shelves while listening to their iPhones. The bowls of Cheerios on the kitchen table. Children hurrying their spoons. The yellow school buses opening their doors, readying to pick up those who will come after. We're flying 30,000 feet above it all. My wife and I are heading back east, where we say, Our Father. The red brick row house in Philadelphia, the place where we raised our children, the place where the dust of our parents and son lies. Here we are suspended in flight. What if we never landed? If we just kept circling and circling and watching what goes on below? I rest my head against my palm, the dotted lights like periods. I was going to read a poem about my son, but I think I'd rather not. This is The Distance of Words. I never knew anything about him except his first name. He knew me as Mr. Pete, a recreation leader at a playground in North Philadelphia. Tony went everywhere I went. I worked Tuesday and Thursday evenings and all day Saturday. Tony knew my schedule. His smiling face always waited. They called him my shadow. He'd cling to me. Tony was always there when I was. No explaining why. I started feeling I needed to say something and said, "Why do you keep following me?" And that was it. Tony was gone. I stopped by Tony's brownstone row house apartment and met him at the door. I stopped by Tony's brownstone row house apartment and met him at the door. I said I was sorry and didn't mean to hurt his feelings. It made no difference. I still feel Tony's breath. When he came around the recreation center, he stayed at a distance. Those who say they never do anything differently live on a different earth. This is Plinkies. And basically, the story's in the poem. And it's interesting. I met somebody from, was it Hungary or Czechoslovakia? And he said they used the word Plinkies. I never met anybody else anywhere, so apparently that's where the connection was. So here it goes. A sound with its own private room in the home of my mind. On the meatless day Friday, Mom made Plinkies. I peeled out the eyes and brown spots, then grated the potatoes on the yellow kitchen table. I scraped until there was the smallest piece, about the size of a half-used bar of hotel soap. Often I scraped my knuckles against the grater, and traces of blood would seep into the soupy batch. Yes, my blood would seep into the bowl, and I think a part of me is here. Mom would mix 2 eggs and flour in the batter to give the mixture body, put Wesson oil in the pan, heat the pan until it sizzled, then pour the potato mix into the pan. When she thought the underside was rusty brown, she'd turn the potato pancakes over and put them on a plate. I'd sprinkle sugar when I was younger and salt when I got older. Yes, my blood is back there in the kitchen of that red brick row house. For me, it keeps weeping into my words until no one will remember. This is Sock Blues. It said Sammy Davis Jr. wore a new pair every day. Stuffed together without a partner, sulking in a shoebox. Black, white, brown, blue. Their partners brewed somewhere under a bed, behind the washer, in the wrong drawer, forgotten corner. If socks could speak, would they scold me for my lack of organization, as my wife does? Reminder of lost things, victims of separation, where do they dwell? Will they be rags or find each other? Let's see where the story goes. Okay, day after. I think most of us will be familiar with this feeling, and this is what I wrote the day after. The leaves are swelling the front lawn, falling heavily from the red maple. After the meds and bourbon of the night, I walk to the curb. My head splits. The headline, elected president. Let's not mention the name. I walk back into the house. Bits of leaves cling to my slippers. Winter is on the doorstep. When will I see spring again? I turn away and go upstairs and close the door. Hopefully I'll be opening up that door on November 3rd. Hands out. With their shopping carts, baby carriages, bags of belongings, they go to Galuska Pennypacker Memorial. When a truck comes, they gather in a broken line for a paper plate and drink. Sycamore leaves grumble as passerbys walking on the sidewalk avoid their eyes. Clarence accepts his food and leans against the bronze statue. His blood-grained eyes stare. A mist smears his vision. After finishing, Clarence points to my cigarette. I give him one. He lights the Marlboro, looks at the ground, and mumbles, "The devil is in the bottle, and I can't get rid of the devil." He turns his head and repeats, The devil is in the bottle, and I can't get rid of the devil. Okay, this is the two poems dedicated and involved with paintings. This is Nighthawk from Edward Hopper. Take 3 a.m., late night shift done, another paper ready for the streets. Harry's luncheonette, black coffee on the counter, always black. Next to me, a redhead sits, looking at her red nails. I'd like to take her fingers in my pocket and go somewhere. Always the news. It's what the public buy. I'm sick of news, sick of the mess, the madness, and the war. Sick of wanting what I can't have. Another mother's tears, another guy's obit, another unidentified body. A guy at the counter with his hat on mixes his spoon and his cup and stares down. He's got nothing to say. Maybe he's done the graveyard shift, or maybe he's waiting for someone who got no place to go. He looks tired. Silence drags. The redhead stares at her nails. It's the first time I've seen her. I want to say something. I want to ask her why she's here at Harry's. Her slender, naked arms talk to me. I'd like to take her to the moon. Trucks are loading for the road. This isn't where the story ends. This is taken from a painting we had at the Art Center. It's called Configural, and it's an abstract pictorial watercolor by Alex McKibben called Not What It Means. I'm in a landscape wanting to find a way in the abstract literal. Bones, ghost, a tail, the face of a cow connected to a cross or a plane or a nose, floatsome in the lake of the palette. A blue-beaked bird with a crown of clouds. Turn the painting on its four sides, always a new perspective. An arm, a mushroom, a duck, drifting across the face of the canvas. It's not what it means, but the means you give it. A mauve lipstick woman, a white figure reaching, a body like a rocket. I walked into this canvas, no way out. I'm still circling my life. And with that, I can't help but think about the Leaving Billings, Montana poem. And this is the last poem. What to talk about. Sometimes I get up bitter. My tongue searches for the right denominator. I look at the books, papers, health articles, nutrition facts, Whitman, Merton, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Rilke, and so much more. These guys who sat on my shelves, I sought their company, the keys that keep me waiting my fingers. Let's not talk about the piles that keep growing, the clutter, clozapam, the black dog behind me, the anger with my shadow, the keys, the iPhone I keep misplacing. Let's not talk about the Twitter and his tweets, his raccoon face, his obsession with his versions, the fakery, the lies, the deplorables, the 40%, COVID-19, the helpless dead, social distancing, the walking mask. A friend at an auto dealership says, just tell me the good news. Just tell me the good news. Let's talk about the buttered bagel on my desk, the just brewed cup of coffee, the blue jay on the Japanese maple, the old man taking his morning stroll with his fox terrier, the sunlight entering the front window. Let's talk about the father. Let's talk about the boy next to his father, learning to ride his bicycle on Golf Hills Road. That's it. Thank you.